On the morning of December 29th, 1890, the frozen ground at Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota was covered in snow. By the end of the day, it would be stained with the blood of a people that would last for generations. More than 150 Lakota men, women, and children were killed by U.S. soldiers. Many shot while fleeing, others hunted down as they hid in ravines or lay wounded in the cold. For decades, the United States government called what happened at Wounded Knee a battle, but it wasn't a battle. It was a massacre, and it did not need to happen. Wounded Knee was the final outcome of years of broken treaties, cultural destruction, fear, and desperation from both sides. To understand how this happened, we need to go back before the first shot rang out, before the soldiers arrived, and before the Lakota were pushed to their tipping point. The people at Wounded Knee were primarily Lakota Sioux, part of the larger Sioux Nation, which also includes the Dakota and Nakota peoples. For generations, the Lakota lived across the Great Plains, following the buffalo herds that sustained them physically, spiritually, and culturally. Their societies were deeply communal, structured around relationships, ceremony, and oral tradition. But by the mid-1800s, everything began to change for the Lakota Sioux. The westward expansion of the United States brought settlers, railroads, and soldiers into Lakota territory. Treaties were signed and repeatedly broken. One of the most important one was the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, which guaranteed the Lakota ownership of the Black Hills, a region sacred to them and their culture. That promise collapsed, however, when gold was discovered in the Black Hills. Miners flooded the area, and instead of removing them, the United States government demanded the Lakota sell their land. The Lakota refused, however, and what followed were decades of war, forced relocation, starvation, and confinement to reservations. The buffalo were systematically pushed to near extinction, not just as a food source, but as a strategy to break native resistance. By the 1880s, the Lakota were starving, confined, and dependent on government rations that were often reduced or withheld. Their way of life was being erased in less than a generation's time. In the years leading up to the conflict at Wounded Knee, the United States government had continued to seize Lakota lands. The once large bison herds of the Great Plains, a staple of the Plains natives, had been hunted to near extinction. Treaty promises to protect reservation lands from encroachment by settlers and gold miners were not implemented as agreed. As a result, there was unrest on the reservations. During this time, news spread among the reservations of a Paiute prophet named Wovoka, founder of the ghost dance religion. He had a vision that the Christian Messiah, Jesus Christ, had returned to Earth in the form of a Native American. According to Wovoka, the white invaders would disappear from native lands, their ancestors would lead them to good hunting grounds, the buffalo herds and all other animals would return in abundance, and the ghosts of their ancestors would return to Earth. They would then live in peace. All this would be brought by the performance of the slow and solemn ghost dance, performed as a shuffle in silence to a single drum beat. Lakota ambassadors to Avoca, Kicking Bear, and Short Bowl taught the Lakota that while performing the ghost dance, they would wear special ghost dance shirts, as had been seen by Black Elk in a vision. However, Kicking Bear misunderstood the meaning of the ghost dance shirts, and said that the shirts had the power to repel bullets. Some tribes, including the Sioux, believed that a great earthquake and flood would occur which would drown all the whites. The ghost dance movement was a result of the slow but ever-present destruction of the Native Americans' way of life. Tribal land was being seized at alarming rates. The once numerous bison herds were nearly hunted to extinction. The entire livelihood of the plain tribes revolved around the bison. Without the resources the animal offered, their cultures rapidly lost stability and security. This forced them to rely on the United States government to provide rations and goods, or else face starvation. The way of life of these independent people was rapidly fading. The ghost dance brought hope. The white man would soon disappear, the buffalo herds would return, people would be reunited with loved ones who had since died. On December 15, 1890, 40 Native American policemen arrived at Sitting Bull's house to arrest him. When Sitting Bull refused to comply, the police used force on him. The Lakota in the villages were enraged. Catch the Bear, a Lakota, shouldered his rifle and shot Lieutenant Bullhead, who reacted by firing his revolver into the chest of Sitting Bull. Another police officer, Red Tomahawk, shot Sitting Bull in the head, and he dropped to the ground. He died between 12 and 1 p.m. on December 15, 1890. On December 28, 1890, Colonel Forsyth of the United States military ordered the surrender of weapons and the immediate removal of the Lakota from the zone of military operations to awaiting trains. A search of the Lakota camp confiscated 38 rifles, and more rifles were taken as the soldiers searched the Lakota. As the soldiers searched the camp, Black Coyote refused to give up his rifle. He spoke no English and was deaf and had not understood the order. Another Lakota man said, "Black Coyote is deaf," and when the soldier persisted, he said, "Stop, he cannot hear your orders." At that moment, 2 soldiers seized Black Coyote from behind, and in the struggle, his rifle discharged. At the same moment, Yellow Bird, another Lakota, threw some dust into the air, and approximately 5 young Lakota men with concealed weapons threw aside their blankets and fired their rifles at Troop K of the 7th Infantry. At first, all firing was at close range. Half the Lakota men were killed or wounded before they had a chance to get off any shots. Some of the Lakota grabbed rifles from the piles of confiscated weapons and opened fire on the soldiers. With no cover, and with many of the Lakota unarmed, this lasted a few minutes at most. While the Lakota warriors and soldiers were shooting at close range, other soldiers used the Hotchkiss guns against a teepee camp full of women and children. According to some accounts, the officers had lost all control of their men. Some of the soldiers fanned out and finished off the wounded. Others leaped onto their horses and pursued the natives, men, women, and but children, and in some cases for miles across the snow-covered prairies. By the time the firing stopped, over 150 Lakota, men, women, and children were dead. Nearly half were women and children. Many bodies were frozen where they fell, and just like that, in less than an hour, the massacre of Wounded Knee was complete. Following a 3-day blizzard after the massacre, the military hired civilians to bury the dead Lakota. The burial party found the deceased frozen. They were gathered up and placed in a mass grave on a hill, overlooking the encampment from which some of the fire from the Hotchkiss guns originated from. It is reported that 4 infants were found alive, wrapped in their deceased mother's shawls. Photographs of the dead circulated in newspapers, shocking some Americans. However, many accepted the official narrative of a battle, and no soldier was ever punished. In an editorial response to the event, the young newspaper editor L. Frank Baum, later the author of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, wrote in the Aberdeen Saturday paper on January 3, 1891. The pioneer has before declared that our only safety depends upon the total extermination of the Indians. Having wronged them for centuries, we had better, in order to protect our civilization, follow it up by one more wrong and wipe these untamed and untamable creatures from the face of the earth. In this lies future safety for our settlers and the soldiers who are under incompetent commands. Otherwise, we may expect future years to be as full of trouble with the Redskins as those have been in the past. For this 1890 campaign, the United States Army awarded 31 Medals of Honor, 19 specifically for service at Wounded Knee. 15 were awarded in the months after the massacre, and 4 more awarded between 1892 and 1895. Wounded Knee marked the end of the Indian Wars. For Native Americans, it symbolized something far worse: the death of armed resistance, the triumph of forced assimilation, and the near destruction of indigenous Native cultures. In the years that followed, Native children were sent to boarding schools where they were forbidden to speak their languages or practice their cultural traditions. The message was clear. If they wanted to continue as a people, their survival required erasing their identity. In the past years, there have been calls for the government to revoke the Medals of Honor given to the soldiers for their actions in this massacre. However, on September 25, 2025, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth announced the following recommendations of the 2024 report. The awarded Medals of Honor would not be revoked, calling the recipients brave soldiers and saying, "We're making it clear, without hesitation, that the soldiers who fought in the Battle of Wounded Knee in 1890 will keep their medals. We're making it clear that they deserve those medals." Hegseth also claimed, "The decision is now final, and their place in our nation's history is no longer up for debate." For decades, Wounded Knee was minimized or ignored in American history, but for the Lakota, it was never forgotten. In 1973, Wounded Knee became the site of another confrontation, this time during a 71-day occupation by members of the American Indian Movement protesting federal abuses. The ground itself seemed to demand remembrance. Today, Wounded Knee stands as a symbol of colonial violence, of cultural destruction, and of lives erased and voices silenced. It forces uncomfortable questions. How does a nation remember its past? Who gets to define words like battle and massacre? And what does justice look like, even generations later? Wounded Knee was not an accident. It was not chaos, and it was the final consequence of policies designed to remove a people from their land, their culture, and their future. A decades-long buildup of tension between the natives and the United States federal government, which resulted in the murder of innocent men, women, and children. Men that stood no chance, women that never got to see their children grow up, and innocent children that never got to experience all of the things they deserved. This is what Black Elk, a famous Lakota healer and holy man, said after the Wounded Knee Massacre. "The nation's hoop is broken and scattered. There is no center left, and the sacred tree is dead." Thank you for taking the time to watch and remember this important American history. If you want to support this channel and help stories like this reach more people, subscribing and liking does help. I appreciate you being here and watching this video. I'll see you guys next week.